When a late-night attack on Rachel Green, a pregnant woman bound to a wheelchair, shatters the peace of her life, her husband, FBI agent Ethan Green, dives into a search for answers and justice. As he digs deeper, what seemed like a random act of violence reveals itself to be the tip of an iceberg laced with secrets and corruption inside the police department. But each truth uncovered forces Ethan closer to impossible choices, with each decision threatening not just his career but the safety of his wife and unborn child. In this city where justice comes at a price, Ethan must confront betrayals from both allies and adversaries, questioning his very faith in the system he's served his entire life. Shattered Boundaries weaves a tale of vengeance, loyalty, and the lengths one man will go to protect his family, even if it means destroying everything he once believed in. In a city divided by power and fear, justice is not just blind, it's for sale. For Rachel Green, the promise of a new beginning is shattered one fateful night when she becomes the victim of a violent assault. Pregnant and wheelchair-bound, Rachel barely escapes with her life, but the trauma runs far deeper than the physical scars. Her husband, Ethan Green, an unwavering FBI agent, is thrust into a battle he never saw coming, one that threatens not only his career but also his family's fragile future. Determined to seek justice, Ethan launches an investigation that quickly reveals the attack was anything but random. As he peels back layers of corruption within the police department, he finds himself entangled in a conspiracy reaching farther and deeper than he could have ever anticipated. With each new lead, Ethan must confront betrayals that force him to question everything: his own integrity, his allies, and the system he has spent his life defending. But the clock is ticking. Each step closer to the truth threatens the safety of his wife and unborn child, and every move Ethan makes brings them closer to an enemy determined to keep deadly secrets buried. Just as he's about to expose the truth, a stunning revelation shatters his world, forcing him to confront an impossible choice: seek justice at any cost or protect the family he loves. Shattered Boundaries is a riveting tale of vengeance, loyalty, and the lengths one man will go to protect those he holds dear. For fans of morally complex thrillers, this novel will keep you questioning until the final page. How far would you go when justice fails? Ethan Green. Physical description: early 30s, tall and athletic, with a well-groomed, no-nonsense appearance. His short, dark hair and intense green eyes reveal his sharp, observant nature. A faint scar along his jaw hints at his past encounters in the field. A dedicated FBI agent, Ethan has always been a staunch advocate for justice. After years of seeing the system's flaws, his own moral compass has become complex and unyielding. His love for Rachel and the expectation of fatherhood keep him grounded, but his sense of duty is his Achilles heel. Rachel Green. Physical description: early 30s, petite, with expressive brown eyes and a warm smile that can quickly turn hard. Her wheelchair is customized for independence, and her style is practical and elegant. A former social worker, Rachel has a history of advocating for vulnerable populations and has never shied away from standing up for what's right. Paralyzed by a previous accident, she learned resilience firsthand, which she now draws on as she deals with the trauma of the attack and fights for justice alongside Ethan. Officer Mark Tanner. Physical description: late 40s, broad and imposing, with a graying face etched with age and hardened expressions. He wears his uniform like a shield, and his rigid, withdrawn demeanor suggests a lifetime of secrets. A longtime cop with a checkered past, Tanner has always had a knack for evading responsibility. He is enmeshed in a web of corrupt cops and has long trusted the system to protect him. The attack on Rachel, however, exposes cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Captain Linda Morales. Physical description: early 50s, tall and composed with streaks of gray in her dark hair. Her piercing gaze and firm posture signal authority, while her immaculate grooming speaks of meticulousness. As one of the few female captains in a male-dominated department, Morales has fought hard for her position. Initially an ally of Ethan, her mixed loyalties complicate their alliance when her connection to corruption within her department comes to light, calling her integrity and Ethan's trust into question. The Green Apartment. A cozy but modest two-bedroom apartment with warm lighting and soft furnishings that exude comfort and stability. The nursery, thoughtfully decorated in pastel colors, serves as a painful reminder of the future they nearly lost. The wheelchair ramps and Rachel's custom kitchen hint at her resilience and independence. The police station, a dingy gray building with harsh fluorescent lighting that reveals every crack and smudge in the peeling paint. Tension is palpable in the hallways, where whispers of corruption echo. The station's conference rooms and locker-lined hallways represent both a battleground for justice and a fortress of secrecy for the officers entrenched within. The abandoned warehouse, the cold, bleak remains of a long-forgotten industry. Broken windows and rusted beams cast eerie shadows across the room, creating an ominous atmosphere. It is here that Ethan confronts the dark side of his investigation, surrounded by the looming weight of truth and danger. City Park, once a peaceful sanctuary, the city park now appears tarnished. Tall, thick trees stand alongside broken benches and litter-strewn paths, creating a jarring mix of natural beauty and urban neglect. This is the site of Rachel's attack, and each visit here haunts Ethan with memories of what nearly destroyed his family. Linda Morales' office, an organized but impersonal space, with awards and certificates meticulously displayed on the walls, displaying her achievements and dedication. Despite its order, the office exudes a coldness, hinting at the ambiguity surrounding Morales' loyalties. Ethan's desperate plea, hospital room. Ethan speaks to a groggy Rachel, who confirms the attack but struggles with details. She remembers fragments of Tanner's appearance and behavior. Determined to protect her and find justice, Ethan vows to track down her attacker. Cliffhanger. Ethan leaves, his mind set on the police department, believing he can use his FBI status to launch an investigation. Ethan approaches Captain Morales' setting. Police department, Morales' office summary. Ethan meets with Captain Linda Morales, expecting cooperation. Morales, however, is cautious, subtly discouraging Ethan from pursuing the case too fervently. Purpose: to introduce Morales' ambiguity, making Ethan question his motives and the department's transparency. Cliffhanger. Morales reluctantly agrees to investigate Tanner, but Ethan senses resistance that hints at deeper corruption. Ethan confronts Tanner's scenario. Police locker room summary. Ethan finds Tanner and questions him. Tanner plays it cool, acting as if he's not involved and denying any involvement, leaving Ethan seething with suspicion but no evidence. Cliffhanger. Tanner's smugness intensifies Ethan's determination, foreshadowing their impending confrontation. Dig deeper. Rachel's trauma unfolds. Hospital room. Rachel suffers intense flashbacks and trauma, haunted by Tanner's face. Ethan comforts her, but she reveals her guilt over going to the park that night, fueling Ethan's anger and determination. Cliffhanger. Rachel begs Ethan to let it go, sensing the danger, but he refuses, strengthening her commitment. Ethan's first break scenario. FBI office summary. Ethan enlists the favor of a fellow FBI agent to investigate Tanner's background. They uncover minor infractions, suggesting a hidden disciplinary history. Cliffhanger. His colleague warns Ethan to tread carefully, mentioning rumors of police connections to organized crime. The abandoned warehouse. Ethan visits a warehouse address linked to one of Tanner's known associates. He discovers signs of undercover police activity, but is interrupted by unknown officers, narrowly escaping. Cliffhanger. Ethan realizes he is up against a network larger than just one man, raising the stakes. Morales warning setting. Morales office. Morales warns Ethan about delving any deeper into the investigation, suggesting he's risking his career and his family's safety. Cliffhanger. Morales hints that she knows more than she's willing to reveal, deepening the mystery around her. Rachel's strength emerges. Green apartment summary. Back home, Rachel insists on helping Ethan with the investigation despite her trauma. They bond, drawing strength from each other, with Rachel sharing memories of the attack to help Ethan. Cliffhanger. Rachel remembers a small tattoo on Tanner's wrist, giving Ethan a critical detail in tracking him down. Tanner's dark secret. Tanner's house summary. Ethan watches Tanner and realizes that Tanner has met with another officer involved in the criminal ring. He photographs the interaction, knowing it could be crucial evidence. Cliffhanger. Tanner spots Ethan from afar, heightening the tension as Ethan must now tread carefully to stay one step ahead. Unmasking the Conspiracy Scene 1. Anonymous tip from Rachel. Setting. Green family apartment summary. Rachel receives an anonymous call warning her to stop investigating Ethan or risk her safety. Ethan ignores it, suspecting Tanner's network. Cliffhanger. Ethan realizes that Rachel is now in immediate danger, and his urgency to uncover the truth intensifies. Confrontation with Morales. Setting. Morales office summary. Ethan confronts Morales, accusing her of obstructing justice. She reveals her own family's connection to the department's corruption, explaining her reluctance to act. Cliffhanger. Morales finally agrees to help Ethan, though his loyalties remain ambiguous. Warehouse surveillance. Warehouse summary. Ethan and Morales stake out the warehouse, catching several officers in a shady deal. They gather photographic evidence, but Morales is visibly uncomfortable, torn between duty and personal ties. Cliffhanger. As they leave, Tanner arrives and sees Ethan, realizing he has been exposed, setting the stage for a final showdown. The Reckoning. Attack on Rachel's home. Green family apartment. Tanner breaks into Green's apartment, threatening Rachel. She bravely fights back, injuring Tanner before he flees. Cliffhanger. This attack leaves Ethan furious, ready to risk everything to bring Tanner down. Final showdown. Abandoned warehouse. Ethan confronts Tanner in the warehouse. They fight, and Ethan overpowers him, coaxing a confession that reveals not only Tanner's guilt, but the depth of the department's corruption. Cliffhanger. Ethan realizes Morales' role was greater than he knew. She allowed corruption to spread under her watch. Truth and consequences. Morales' confession. Morales' office admits her guilt and involvement in covering up for her colleagues. She agrees to go public, hoping that it will save the department and redeem herself in some way. Cliffhanger. Morales' confession is leaked to the media, triggering a wave of resignations and arrests. Rachel and Ethan's new resolution. Green family apartment. With the investigation closed, Rachel and Ethan can finally begin to heal. They commit to moving forward and focusing on their family, knowing that the trauma has brought them closer together. Cliffhanger. As they embrace, Ethan receives a phone call, a subtle hint that the corruption in the city may not be completely eradicated, leaving room for suspense and reflection. Epilogue. The city remains. Ethan's decision. Setting. City park summary. Ethan visits the park where Rachel was attacked, reflecting on his journey. He is now more aware of the darkness of the system, but still believes in justice. Cliffhanger. He vows to continue his work, knowing that the fight for justice will never truly end, but that he is ready to face whatever comes next. Rachel Green glided through her modest but warm apartment, carefully arranging soft blankets in the nursery and adjusting the pastel-colored mobile above the crib. The room was ready for the baby, and its peace radiated a calming reassurance. She smiled, letting her fingers trace the edge of a stuffed bear's ear, imagining the tiny fingers that would one day grip it tightly. In the living room, the clock chimed softly. It was already late, and Ethan wouldn't be home until well past midnight. A brief flicker of loneliness settled over her, but Rachel brushed it away, focusing on the life she and Ethan had built here. Their modest apartment with its low lighting and cozy feel was a refuge, a place that carried the promise of a new beginning. She'd spent years adjusting to her wheelchair, and this apartment had become a symbol of her resilience. Just as she started back toward the living room, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw her mother's name flashing on the screen. A slight sense of unease surfaced, but she answered anyway, putting the phone to her ear. Her mother's voice was cheerful but a bit strained, and after a few minutes of conversation, she asked if Rachel could meet her briefly at the city park. Rachel hesitated but agreed. She hadn't been out that night, and the thought of a change in scenery felt like a small adventure. Rachel navigated her wheelchair through the dimly lit city streets. The night air was thick, and the usual hum of the city seemed quieter than usual, every sound muted under a blanket of fog that had rolled in. She moved steadily, keeping to the sidewalk, her movements precise and practiced. She was accustomed to her independence, and though she sometimes felt the city's unfriendly edges more than she would admit, tonight felt different. It was the kind of quiet that heightened every shadow, every sudden movement, creating a sense of isolation that nagged at her. As she approached the city park, she noticed a group of young men loitering near the corner. They eyed her curiously, and for a brief moment, Rachel felt her heartbeat quicken. But the men only watched her pass, and as she continued, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Entering the park, she rolled past a row of tall, dark trees that swayed in the breeze, their branches casting long, skeletal shadows across the broken concrete. The park had changed over the years, becoming a mixture of natural beauty and urban decay. Despite the darkened benches and littered pathways, it still carried memories for her, remnants of better days. But tonight, her mother was nowhere to be found. She reached for her phone, scrolling through missed calls, and attempted to call her mother back, but her call went straight to voicemail. Her anxiety grew as the silence around her deepened. She could feel her pulse, steady but rising, an instinctual whisper warning her that something was wrong. The park seemed to breathe around her, and Rachel's senses were on high alert when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned sharply and saw a figure in a police uniform walking toward her. Relief mixed with confusion as she glanced up at the officer, assuming he might be there to help or offer assistance. The man's face was shadowed, but his stance was rigid, with a harshness that made Rachel pause. "Out here all alone, huh?" Officer Mark Tanner's voice was low, edged with something unfriendly. He leaned over slightly, his eyes scanning her with an intensity that felt invasive. "Yes, I'm meeting someone," Rachel replied, trying to sound confident. "Meeting someone at this hour?" Tanner's expression shifted, his face hardening. "Doesn't seem wise, especially in your condition." His gaze flickered to her stomach, and a chill ran through her as she noticed the lack of concern in his eyes. His words dripped with a subtle menace that set every nerve on edge. Rachel's instinct told her to leave, to get out of the park and away from this man. She wheeled backward slightly, but Tanner moved quickly, blocking her path, his hand gripping her wheelchair's handle firmly. Panic surged through her veins as she tried to jerk free, but his grip was unyielding. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling, unable to keep the fear out of her tone. "Oh, just keeping an eye out. Making sure you're safe," Tanner replied, his voice low and menacing. "Can't be too careful in this city." Her heart pounded as she tried to push his hand off, her every movement growing more frantic. He tightened his grip, leaning closer, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Where do you think you're going?" Before Rachel could scream, Tanner's hand clamped down over her mouth. He shoved her backward, the wheelchair tipping, and she crashed to the ground, feeling the rough gravel scrape against her skin. Her stomach twisted with fear and pain, her arms flailing as she tried to defend herself, her mind racing with one desperate thought: protect the baby. Tanner loomed over her, his face a mask of anger, his eyes devoid of compassion. He pressed her into the ground, muttering words that were barely audible but laced with venom. Rachel's every instinct was to fight, to push him off, but her strength was no match for his. The sounds of the city felt distant, muffled, and her vision blurred as the pain overwhelmed her. She fought for every breath, her hands clutching at the ground, her body racked with terror and helplessness. Just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. Tanner released her, standing over her with a satisfied sneer before stepping back into the darkness, leaving her bruised and alone in the cold night. Rachel lay there, gasping for air, her hand instinctively cradling her stomach as her consciousness slipped away. Ethan Green stepped through the door of their apartment, expecting to find Rachel settled on the couch or reading in bed. The quietness of the apartment felt wrong, almost unnerving. He checked his phone, wondering if he'd missed a message, but nothing had come through. His chest tightened as he scanned the living room, noticing Rachel's purse and phone on the counter. He began searching each room, his voice echoing in the silence. "Rachel?" The emptiness pressed down on him, and dread twisted in his gut. He called her phone, hoping to hear it ring somewhere in the apartment, but the call went straight to voicemail. The growing sense of panic gnawed at him, urging him to act. Ethan's mind raced, wondering where she might be. With mounting anxiety, he dialed a contact from his phone, the city hospital. His voice was steady, though barely. To his horror, the hospital receptionist confirmed that Rachel had been admitted just an hour earlier. He didn't wait for further explanation, only asked for the address, and then rushed out the door. Ethan arrived at the hospital, his heart racing as he made his way through sterile hallways, the scent of antiseptics thick in the air. A nurse guided him to Rachel's room, her expression sympathetic, but he barely noticed. All he could focus on was Rachel, lying motionless on the hospital bed, her face pale and bruised. He approached slowly, his chest tightening with every step, the sight of her injuries cutting deeper than any wound he'd ever known. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as though he could transfer his strength to her. The doctor entered quietly, explaining that Rachel had survived a traumatic attack and was stable, but the next hours would be critical. Miraculously, the baby was unharmed, but Rachel would need time and care to heal. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and fury, his mind whirling with the need for justice. As he sat beside her, Ethan whispered a promise, a vow to find the man responsible and make him pay. He could feel the intensity of his own words, knowing that this was a commitment he couldn't break, no matter the cost. As dawn began to break through the hospital window, Ethan knew his next steps. He would leave no stone unturned, use every resource he had, and confront anyone who stood in his way. There was only one thing left in his mind: justice. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of machines monitoring Rachel's vitals. Ethan sat by her side, his hand wrapped around hers, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her knuckles. Despite the cuts and bruises on her face, Rachel's expression was calm, her breathing steady but shallow. Her eyelids fluttered, and he leaned in, his heart pounding as she began to stir. "Rachel," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented but gradually focusing on him. The pain in her eyes, mingled with fear, made his chest tighten. He wanted to ease her suffering, to tell her everything would be all right, but he needed to know what happened. The moment he had dreaded since receiving the call hung between them, fragile and full of tension. "Do you remember anything?" he asked gently. "Anything about who did this?" Rachel's gaze shifted away, her brow furrowing as she struggled to recall the details. "It was the man. A police officer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He was rough. There was something in his eyes, Ethan, like he was enjoying it." A surge of anger and grief washed over Ethan as he processed her words. The revelation that a police officer was responsible shattered any illusions he might have held about their safety. His heart ached, but his resolve only hardened. "I'll find him," he promised, his grip on her hand tightening. "I'll make sure he pays for what he did." A flicker of fear crossed Rachel's face, and she tugged his hand weakly. "Please, Ethan, don't put yourself in danger. He's dangerous, whoever he is. Just stay safe." But Ethan couldn't let it go. The injustice, the assault on his wife and unborn child. It was a personal attack on everything he held dear. He nodded to reassure her, but knew he wouldn't rest until justice was served. Leaving the hospital was the hardest thing Ethan had ever done, but his determination fueled every step. As an FBI agent, he knew the power of leverage, and he intended to use every resource at his disposal to track down Rachel's attacker. His first stop was the police department, and more specifically, Captain Linda Morales. Morales was a seasoned officer with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol. Though Ethan didn't know her well, he'd heard of her loyalty to her department and her commitment to keeping things orderly. She seemed like the natural ally to approach, but he also knew that navigating this would be delicate. The atmosphere in her office was cold and formal, her walls lined with awards and certificates. She didn't rise as he entered, but gestured to the seat in front of her desk. "Agent Green, I understand you wanted to discuss a personal matter," Morales began, her expression neutral. Ethan's gaze met hers, challenging, but he restrained his anger. "Yes, Captain Morales," he replied, keeping his voice controlled. "My wife was assaulted by one of your officers last night. I want to know who it was, and I need your cooperation." Morales's brow arched slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. "I can appreciate your need for answers, Agent Green, but these are serious allegations. I can't simply accuse one of my officers without substantial evidence." Ethan's jaw clenched. My wife remembers his face. She described him as if he had some vendetta against her, and she's sure he was in uniform. Morales paused, her gaze sharpening. I'll look into it, but understand that any action will follow the proper channels. We need proof, not suspicion. I'm sure you know how these things work. Ethan leaned forward, his voice cold. I don't need reminders about procedure, Captain. I just need your word that you'll do everything you can to get me that proof. Morales held his gaze, an almost imperceptible flicker of hesitation crossing her face. I'll review our records, Agent Green, but I advise you to let us handle it internally. Sometimes, pushing too hard doesn't get you the results you're looking for. Ethan left the office, feeling a subtle warning woven into her words. But he was undeterred. Morales's reluctance only strengthened his resolve. After leaving Morales's office, Ethan wandered down the corridors of the police station, his mind racing as he strategized his next move. If Morales wasn't fully on his side, he would need to act carefully, making sure he left no stone unturned. Suddenly, his gaze locked onto a man emerging from the locker room. A graying, imposing figure with a hardened expression. Mark Tanner. Ethan's fists tightened at his sides, and he strode toward Tanner, who noticed him immediately and offered a curt nod. Agent Green, what brings the FBI down here? Tanner's tone was casual, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. Just following up on a personal matter, Ethan replied evenly, scanning Tanner's face for any sign of recognition. I heard there was an incident in the park last night. A woman was attacked. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Tanner smirked, shrugging nonchalantly. Lots of things happen in this city, Agent. Not everything's worth my time. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. You seem pretty relaxed about the idea of someone getting hurt on your watch, Officer Tanner. Almost like you enjoy the thought. Tanner's smirk faded slightly, replaced by a steely glare. Careful with your words, Green. I've got nothing to hide. Besides, if I were involved, don't you think I'd be smarter than to leave a trail? The tension between them was palpable, the hostility brimming just below the surface. Ethan studied Tanner's face, memorizing the slight twitch in his jaw, the cold glint in his eyes. Tanner's demeanor was smug, but there was something else, a darkness that hinted at the cruelty Rachel had described. Without another word, Ethan turned and left, his anger simmering. Tanner's dismissive attitude fueled his determination to keep digging, but he knew he'd need more than a hunch to bring the man down. Back at the hospital, Ethan returned to Rachel's room, and though she was resting, her face was tense. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she noticed him. How's it going? She asked, her voice still weak. Making progress, Ethan assured her, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. We'll get to the bottom of this. Rachel's eyes clouded, her hand clutching his tightly. Ethan, I keep seeing his face. It's like he's right there every time I close my eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I shouldn't have gone to the park. I didn't think. He squeezed her hand, his anger bubbling up again. None of this is your fault, Rachel. He's the one who should be punished. But Rachel looked at him with fear. Please, Ethan, don't let this consume you. I don't want this to take you away from me, too. Her plea cut through him, but his resolve remained unshaken. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. I promise I'll be careful, Rachel, but I have to see this through, for both of us,